Welcome everyone to Conversation with Bob Roth from the David Lynch Foundation. I'm going to start while everyone is coming online. We're going to start with a welcome video so you can see it as people are joining.
How many people here have tried some form of meditation? Yeah. That which was unusual before is now seen as essential.
We're all here because we all have something in common. We all practice transcendental meditation, which I think people don't really understand exactly what it is and what a difference it's made in people's lives.
9 years ago, David Lynch, the filmmaker, and I got together to establish the David Lynch Foundation to bring transcendental meditation to at-risk school kids. And in the last 9 years, we've provided scholarships for over 500,000 kids. I wanted to do something of substance to change the world.
Meditation, Bob tells us that it's good for kids. It's good for people suffering post-traumatic stress.
Really good for
veterans returning. They're introducing this program to veterans and it
really.
Yeah,
Meditation Bob's all.
Yeah, Meditation Bob's got it going on.
Trauma and toxic stress, the #1 health epidemic in America today. Modern medicine has no way to prevent it and no way to cure it.
The amount of research on transcendental meditation is saying it's a useful tool to prevent and address the problem of stress has been a game changer. Over the last 40 years, there's been over 400 scientific studies published on the technique that show that it reduces anxiety twice as much as any other sort of relaxation technique, depression, insomnia. It wakes up the brain and improves memory, focus, creativity.
There's no way I could take 40 minutes out of my day and meditate. What would you say to those people?
I would say it's not a question of sort of time management, because we never have time. It's a question of energy management.
I love energy. And TM is such this incredible, it's like a free account of an endless amount of it.
We're talking about a human being mechanism. We are hardwired for this. It's just how to access that. Surface of our mind, the gotta mind. Anybody have that? I gotta do this and I gotta do that. Gotta make a list, gotta find the list, gotta make a new list. I gotta get going, I gotta slow down, I gotta get up, I gotta get to sleep. Anybody? Deep within every one of us, right now, is a level of our mind that is already quiet.
The thing about it is that there's a kind of a peacefulness that I don't think I've ever achieved before.
The thing to convey is also how it compounds so that it keeps getting better. Whatever amount that you're meditating, next year will be better, and the year after that will be better.
I'm a big advocate of equipping children and us as adults with the tools that we need to find silence and calm that no longer exists anywhere in the world. And that calm and silence exists within each of us.
There's a level of life under those waves. I encourage you to access it.
Your family will benefit, your job will benefit, and most importantly, you'll benefit.
Bobby Roth, thank you for putting this together.
Thank you all for joining us. Now, hopefully several are on, and we're thrilled to have Bob Roth. I thought that I couldn't do him justice to introduce, so I wanted to have the video show how many incredible people Bob has touched over the years. You know, he's one of the most sought after meditation teachers, teaching for over 45 years, transcendental meditation. And he's the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that brings transcendental meditation to at-risk populations, including inner city schools, women and children who suffer from domestic violence, veterans who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and has worked tirelessly to be able to bring meditation to millions of people. So I wanted to welcome Bob. He's also has a podcast called Success Without Stress on Sirius XM, and iHeartRadio also has given him a show called Stay Calm. So those are some other areas that you can access Bob's wisdom. Welcome, Bob. Thank you very much for addressing human ventures, founders, investors, and community at large. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
That was wonderful, and that was a heavy-duty case of a bit of being oversold.
No, Bob, has been such a mentor to me. I'm thrilled to have him here. And you've been meditating for 50 years.
Almost 51.
51.
And I started when I was 68 years old.
So all that time, why do you think meditation is such a on the tip of everybody's tongue now?
It's an interesting thing. I think that there's 3 reasons. I think the problem of stress is greater than, first of all, thank you for having me, Heather, and I appreciate you and the work you do, and I would do anything that you ask me to do, so it's wonderful to be here with you. You know, I look at the arc of 50 years of meditating. When the early days you didn't want to say the word meditation in public, and now it's everywhere, or a lot of everywhere. And I think that there's 3 reasons. I think the problem of stress is far greater than it's ever been now with the coronavirus and what's going on with the economy. There's so much ups and downs. So the problem of stress is greater, and it also, we know it's impacting our children in ways that are far greater than it was even 10 years ago. And we understand that impact of stress. We understand what it does to our brain. We understand what it does to our cardiovascular system, our limbic system, nervous system. Number 2, pharmaceutical company hasn't come up with any magic pill that we can give our child when the day starts, that the child stays calm and chill and doesn't get stressed and anxious because they're home and why am I home and what's going on. And there's no pill that we can give our child or ourselves at the end of the day when we feel stressed. I mean, we certainly do a lot to manage and mask it. We mask it with alcohol, we mask it with caffeine, and we manage it with antihypertensive medication, depressant medication, anti-anxiety medication, but it doesn't get to the root cause, the core of that trauma, that tumor of stress. And the final reason is there's so much interest in meditation these days, I think because of science. I'm a science guy. When you think of what a meditation teacher would be like, I ain't that, you know, if you think of woo, I ain't that guy. I love science. I love data. I love things to be, you know, I like big ideas. I love big ideas, but it's got to be anchored in reality. And I think the enormous amount of research on meditation in general and transcendental meditation specifically is what's taken the whole discussion into the mainstream.
A lot of people say, when I tell them that I've been practicing meditation for quite some time, they say, oh, I can't meditate, or I've tried Headspace and I can't do it. And, you know, what do you say to people who say that they can't meditate?
Well, all of you guys who are watching, you know, probably you're going, yeah, I can't do it. Or many of you. The word meditation is not generic. It's like saying, oh, I was sick and I took some medication and it didn't work. Or I was, you know, I wasn't eating well and now I'm on a diet and all. So it's not this, they're not all the same. And I think one thing that's happened over all the years of research on meditations in general and transcendental meditation, I have to say specifically. And I want to pause here by saying, this will not be a discussion of what's better or worse. I don't like that. It is a discussion of evidence-based, it's a discussion of science, and it's an understanding of that different meditations have different outcomes, and you can prescribe or practice a meditation for specific reasons. But there are some meditations that are very difficult to do and go away for 10 days and Vipassana retreats and things like that. And transcendental meditation is not that way. Transcendental meditation is very accessible and simple to learn and simple to practice. And I can't explain that more if you want to go into it, but I just tell people they're not all the same. And also if somebody says to me, well, I already do mindfulness or I do Headspace or I do TM, and I say, it's not an either or here, folks. This is a very, particularly you guys, founders, and I mean, you're under the gun, the stresses, the trauma, the demands, the challenges. We need tools in a toolbox. We need evidence-based tools in a toolbox, and we don't have the time to just sort of mess around. We don't have 20 minutes to just waste. So I think we're at a prime time. I'll make one last point, and then you can ask the next question. And that is, I think there's never been a more important time than right now, more telling time to do some form of meditation. There's never been more opportunities to do some form of meditation, and there's never been more misunderstandings of what meditation is right now. So it's a very interesting time when people are open, but they really don't know what's going on.
That's great. So, you know, at Human Ventures, right now we have a cohort of founders, and they're all dedicated to building companies in health and wellness. And when we started, we opened up the doors at Human, said, who's building in health and wellness? We saw a lot around stress reduction, a lot around sleep, mental health, and meditation. And, I'd love for you to be able to kind of go into depth of how do these different meditations differ? What's happening in the brain? What's happening to the physiology? We do know a lot more now. It's not just like a blanket meditation, one size fits all. So would love to hear your perspective from doing this for so long and how you describe it.
So thank you. It's a great question. I like to use the analogy of an ocean. You're sitting on a little boat and you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And all of a sudden you get these giant 30, 40, 50-foot high waves, and you could think, you're in a little boat, you could think, oh my God, the whole ocean is in upheaval. But if you did, the word whole is a bit of an exaggeration, because if you did a cross-section of the ocean, you'd realize that the ocean is miles deep. And while the surface of the ocean may be by its nature turbulent, the depth of the ocean by its nature is pretty darn silent. And we can use the analogy of for the mind. So the ocean, surface of the ocean, all these waves, that can be like the thinking mind. Some people call it the monkey mind. I like to call it the gotta mind. I mentioned on that horrible video excerpt on that video, that thing you showed. But the gotta mind. And that's I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to call him, and I got to call her, and I got to make a list, and I got to find a list, and I got to make a new list, and I got to slow down, and I got to get going, and I got to get to sleep, and and it's all the gottas. And so it's a natural human desire. And that's why I think there's so much interest in meditation these days. It's a natural human desire to say, I like some inner calm, some inner clarity, some inner focus, some inner connectedness, some inner inspiration, some inner innovation. And the operative word there is inner. And the question is there such a thing as an inner? And if so, how do we get there? And this is enter the realm of meditation throughout time. Thousands of years ago, meditation was associated with a powerful mind, a blissful mind, a focused mind, a creative mind, a peaceful mind. Then it got a little crazy over time as meditations fell apart and they got into sort of secty stuff. But now we know that there are 3 basic types of meditation. And we know that from brain research, because as your founders will know, every discrete experience that we have impacts the brain in a discrete way. So if I listen to some classical music, it has one effect on my brain. If I listen to heavy metal music, electronic music has another effect on my brain. If I watch a romantic comedy, it has one effect on my brain. If I watch a David Lynch horror film, it has another effect on my brain. So it has a different effect on the brain. So the researcher said, let's see if meditations are all the same. So they did a lot of different people do a lot of different types of meditation. And it turns out, is this taking too long to answer your question? Okay.
No, it's great. This is great.
Okay, it turns out that there are 3 basic types of meditation with all the different approaches. When you look at the mechanics, what you're doing with your mind, with your brain, what you're doing with your mind and the effect it has on the brain, 3 basic types, and I will explain them. The first is called focused attention. Focused attention is your classic sort of meditation from Hollywood. Okay, now, concentrate and clear your mind of thoughts. And the analogy with the ocean is, if you want to have a calm ocean, what disrupts a calm ocean? Waves. So minimize or stop the waves, you'll have a calm ocean. So if you want to have a calm mind, what's a disruptor of a calm mind? Thoughts, moods, feelings. So focused attention is a technique to clear the mind of thoughts, minimize thoughts. It involves concentration on your breath, concentration on a mantra or a sound, concentration on points of your body, concentration on a loving kindness, but concentration. Don't let the mind wander. And when we do that, Heather, it creates something called gamma brain waves, which are 20 to 50 cycles per second. And that's when your brain, as you know, is working very hard. Second type of meditation, open monitoring. And I'm glad we're having a chance to take the time for this, because I really want to give you this little mini masterclass to sort of where things stand. And I'm doing it very quickly. There's nuances, but you get the idea. So open monitoring says, thoughts are not necessarily the disruptor of calm, but the content of thoughts can be the disruptor of calm. So I could have a thought about a guy named Joe or Jackie, somebody named Jackie, and I don't know anybody named Jackie, so, but if I have a thought about somebody named Jackie, and 10 years ago, Jackie done me wrong, and I have that thought. So open monitoring teaches me to be in the present. Open monitoring teaches me to dispassionately observe my thoughts, my moods, my feelings, my behavior. Mindfulness. Many, many mindfulness techniques to teach us to be not 10 years ago when Jackie done me wrong, but now in the present. And when I'm in the present, there's equanimity. When I do that approach, it creates something called, largely, there's different along with it, but largely theta brain waves, which are 4 to 8 cycles per second. And theta brain waves are either sort of onset dream, or you're thinking about something deeply. You could walk into a room and you see someone and they're just sort of lost in thought. It's not daydreamy, superficial, but there's a quiet, there's a silence around them. You don't want to disturb them. This is following the content of thought deeply. So these two approaches, almost done here, these two approaches are called cognitive approaches to meditation. Cognitive means pertaining to your thoughts, your moods, your feelings, your behavior, the waves. The third type is called self-transcending, and that's transcendental meditation. And self-transcending says thoughts are part of the ocean, but every ocean has that deep silence at its basis, and the hypothesis, and this is a key word, the hypothesis with self-transcending is that deep within every one of us right now, there's a level where your mind is already calm and settled and peaceful and wide awake. We already know that there's a vertical dimension to the mind. We feel things deeply, or we hurt deeply, or we love deeply, or we have an intuition. Somebody comes and says, I got a great idea for a business for you, and it makes good sense on the surface, but then you think about it on a quiet level in your mind, you go, I don't think so. So the hypothesis is far deeper than that. We all have this level where the mind is already quiet. And transcendental meditation is the simplest, natural, effortless technique to just access that. And when we do, there's a complete constellation of changes that take place in the brain and the body. Number one, the brainwave signature shifts to alpha 1, which is 8 to 10 cycles per second. And that's a state of inner calm, but awake. I can go into more, but I'll let you get in a question. Otherwise, it's just Bob rambling on.
No, I think this is helpful. I mean, I think what I would love to hear more about is, why does meditation release stress? Why does it reduce? Why is it good for you? And yes, the brains have, you have the brain effect on the brain, but then, what are you seeing in daily life?
Well, it's a great question. The thing is, one of the things about transcendental meditation, and again, I go to the point that I don't think it's an either or. I think people they're complementary to each other. So what transcendental meditation does, when your active thinking mind settles down in TM, just act effortlessly, and I use the word effortlessly very specifically. I'm not just sort of like a throwaway line. Effortlessly settles down, then your body gains a state of rest, in many regards deeper than the deepest part of deep sleep. That was a study that was originally done at Harvard Medical School back in the early 70s and published in Science and Scientific American. They measured oxygen consumption, which is a level of an indicator of metabolic rate. What that deep rest does, to answer your question now, what that deep rest does, it sets up the conditions for the body to heal itself. There's a hormone called cortisol, which is secreted by the adrenal glands, which sit on top of our kidneys, when we are feeling pressured, threatened, challenged, during uncertain times. When we perceive something as uncertain, then the body responds the adrenals respond by secreting cortisol. Now, we need cortisol if we're being chased by a lion 200,000 years ago on the savannah, or we're in combat. But we don't need cortisol, high levels of cortisol, for the everyday pressures and challenges that build up. So there's an epidemic of high cortisol levels. What does cortisol do? Number one, attacks or undermines, you probably know, you guys know this, the immune system. That's why a person who's stressed or anxious gets sick more often. The other thing that it does is it floods the hippocampus, which is the memory center in your brain. So that's why when you're anxious, you can't remember things. You can't remember phone numbers. You can't remember what you're supposed to be doing. Or you have a child who's a smart, hardworking, sensitive soul who studies very hard for an exam, gets easily anxious. The exam comes, remembers nothing. They studied, he or she studied, hippocampus. During a good night's sleep, cortisol levels may drop, I don't know, 5 or 10%. They sort of are settling down, and you need some cortisol to get up in the morning, by the way. Cortisol is fine. It's just not so much that we have. 5 or 10%. During 20 minutes of TM, published research shows that it drops 30 to 40%. And one last thing, there's a neurotransmitter called serotonin, which is our so-called happiness neurotransmitter or well-being transmitter. When the mind settles down and the stresses go from the system, there's an increase in serotonin, and that's why we feel better after we meditate. And the last point is, these things are not just in the moment. These things have a spillover effect. The reduced cortisol levels, the higher serotonin levels. The National Institutes of Health have given, and the Department of Defense have given almost $30 million to study the effects of TM on stress, high blood pressure, PTSD, and it shows that TM is more effective for reducing high blood pressure than many antihypertensive medications without any side effects. Next answer is going to be short.
No, you're here to see you. So also
Okay.
I want to let everybody know in the audience that you can put some of your questions in the Q&A. I will field those at the end. We'll take some at the end, but you can start typing them if you have other questions as well. Bob, so, I think a lot of people have now heard about meditation. They understand, even some people, especially people who are probably on here, have some experience with that and know more about wellness practices. You teach a lot of high-powered executives, and they want to learn because they want to up their game and they want to have more efficiency. I wonder if you could talk about, there's stress reduction, there's getting more sleep, and then also the optimizing side of meditation.
No, it's fantastic. I'd love to take a few minutes and talk, because the research on the brain is so telling. So there's the amygdala, which is the reactivity center. It's in the limbic system in the brain, and it sits right on top of the brain stem. And this is the fighter, the fight or flight. It's the fire alarm. It's the reactivity. Some information comes in and we feel threatened, and then the amygdala sends out signals to the hypothalamus, and that sends out all these stress hormones, and now we're fight or flight. There's another part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the size of your fist, and it's right behind your forehead. And that's executive functioning. That's the grown-up part of your brain. That's the most recently developed part, evolutionary part of the brain. It governs decision-making, judgment, planning, sense of self. So that's here. It's also the rational filter against impulsive decisions. What happens is, when the amygdala takes over, when we're under stress, the amygdala gets hyper-aroused and the prefrontal cortex goes offline. And now the amygdala runs the show. And we're overreacting, or someone we work with is overreacting to everything, because this executive functioning is shut down. So what the research on transcendental meditation shows, and they've seen this with so many veterans now in particular, and I can talk about the work we're doing with the VA with PTSD. What they find is it has a calming effect on the amygdala, and it brings the prefrontal cortex back online. So that's just for being, the prefrontal cortex is also called the CEO of the brain. It's the only part of the brain that information from the outside doesn't come to the prefrontal cortex. Information comes from outside to all the other parts of the brain, and it gets filtered to the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex, the CEO says, do this, don't do that in 3 weeks, do that in 3 months. So that's one thing I want to tell you. Now I want to tell you something much cooler. Okay, about creativity. So I love talking to you guys. You know how they used to say, if you're a creative person, you're a right hemisphere person, and if you're a numbers cruncher and an analyst, you're a left hemisphere person. You know, you're the artist and the scientist. Turns out that's not true. After all these decades, it's not true. Creativity and the creative process, because not just creativity, the creative process is not lodged in one region of the brain. The creative process is a product of networks within the brain. And there's three basic networks. One is called the executive control center, front of the brain. The other is called, well, I'll just explain that first. So that is, you have a good idea, and the executive control center, now it comes online, and now you got to focus, you got to put pen to paper, you got to make it happen. You got to really drill down, and that's the ability to really work hard. That's gamma brain waves, that's on task, positive, exhausting. That's why at the end of a day, when you've been just using, you're tired. You haven't done any physical work, you're tired. So brain researchers wanted to know what's going on in the brain. Let's see. What's going on in the brain when we're not working hard? We're not stressing out. What is the resting mode of the brain? What does the brain default to? Well, it turns out there's a part of the brain that when we're not focused, it's not resting, it's still functioning, but it's a sort of a humming sort of thing. I mean, it's a different type of activity. And so they came up with a very creative name for what the brain defaults to. They called it the default mode network. And they were very dismissive of the default mode network. It's a wandering brain. It's the brain where you're just sort of wasting time, even thinking negative thoughts, just going and over. It's your brain not on task. Well, now they have two new names for the default mode network. First, they call it the imagination network. And second, and I kid you not, they call it the genius lounge. This is the part of the brain, the non-focused, settled part of the brain where innovative, non-linear, creative ideas come from. The default mode network or the imagination network or the genius lounge, the visual of the genius lounge is just magnificent. But you take a hot shower and a great idea comes. You're working really feverishly on something and a good friend says, you know, you got to get away from your computer. You're just, you know, it's a diminishing returns. Let's go for a walk. Let's just get away. And you get fresher and then a good solution comes. So the creative process, the imagination network, we come up with an idea. There's a third network. This is just called the salience network. It turns on it turns on and off these two things. So you get the good idea, salience network sort of turns off the imagination network, and now all your energy goes towards focus and making this happen. You have an idea for a company, now make it happen. Stress shuts down the attention network, the executive control center. When you're highly stressed, you can't focus, you're fragmented. And stress also suppresses the imagination network, the default mode network. Most people, I'm getting to my point here, most people have one good idea, salience network shuts it down, focus. Stop that, say default mode network, back and forth, one or the other, one or the other. So, and you can Google this, you can look up imagination network, creativity, default mode network. There was a study with 200 of the top, what they considered the most creative people in the world. And they found out something interesting, that very creative people, their brains are hardwired differently than most people's. Why? Because they have the ability to interact and back and forth, communicate back and forth between the imagination network and the attention, then the executive control network. It's not a barrier, it's not a wall, which means you can continue to innovate and create as you put things into practice. And that means it lifts your whole creative process to a whole nother level. And the last point, and during transcendental meditation, and the research is on this in particular is about to begin, but the previous research has shown two things: that it does, as I said earlier, bring the executive control center, the prefrontal cortex, online. And because the technique is effortless, there's no concentration or control in the meditation at all, that it wakes up the default mode network. And here's the thing. Last word, big word here, not big word. Neuroplasticity of the brain. The neurons, the brain cells that fire together during this transcendent experience, during the meditation, the connections that are made during that experience, down here, not up here stopping waves, but down here where the mind is cool and calm and collected and unbounded, those connections in meditation last out of meditation. You have neural pathways are established, so you're maintaining that kind of creative flow through everything that you do. So yes, it helps reduce stress, which is absolutely essential because stress shuts all this down. But yes, it also wakes up these connections in the brain. And one last thing, any meditation that involves concentration or control of the mind, while it may have other wonderful values, does suppress the default mode network, just because effort is being made.
I love, there are a bunch of questions that are coming in. We'll definitely get through some of the logistical ones about where to meditate, how to do it, that sort of stuff at the end. I want to just continue on this point. Somebody said, how do you meditate without killing the drive provided by the amygdala? So that stress that pushes you forward. And I remember people used to ask David Lynch this too. If you meditate, are you going to lose your edge for your creepy?
He said he didn't want to end up with hippy dippy lying under a tree, just sort of looking at daisies. No, because this is not suppressing. This is not suppressing suppressing the amygdala. It's just the inappropriate activation, which actually is not healthy for us. What people find, and you have some of the most successful people over, Ray Dalio's been doing this for 50 years. And in other fields, Jerry Seinfeld's been meditating 50 years. Howard Stern, 50 years. David Lynch, 45 years. The experience isn't not that you don't have a drive. You have a drive, but it's not a drive that's driven by a stress, an obsession that is just going to consume you, that you're just trying to outrun, that keeps you awake at night or forces you to sort of self-medicate. You have as much drive. I've been meditating. I'm going to be 70 years old. I've been meditating over 50 years. I have more energy now than I had when I was 25. And I sleep fewer hours and I wake up feeling fresher than when I was a kid. So it's not that. It's a different ballgame. It's a balanced, integrated brain and nervous system where your energy goes to something productive rather than battling those inner.
Now we're all in technology and we all hear about Headspace, Calm, kind of going. What do the apps? How do they fall short in meditation? And then maybe you can also talk about what TM is different in that way too, how you learn, or what's the easiest way to start transcendental meditation and how that differs. You're laughing at me.
No, just I've known Heather like forever, so it's so wonderful to be doing this. She's like one of my favorite people on every level in the world. So I want to explain just for a moment how it works and how it differs, and then I can answer that question. Okay, how are we on time?
I'm keeping track on time, but
okay.
We have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Why does Calm and Headspace, why is that different than?
Okay, first I want to explain what happens. So how do we get from here? Active thinking mind, gotta mind, monkey mind, all this stuff. And I could never clear my mind of thoughts. Like you could never stop all the waves on the surface of the ocean. No can do, unnatural. How do we go from here to this, where the mind is cooler and calmer? I remember saying quieter levels of the mind. This one guy said, "What are you talking about?" It's like, what are quieter levels of mind? I said, in the old days when you could go to a playground with your kid, you see it at the playground, you say, "Wow, that kid is a hothead. That kid is boiling over with rage. He just is tense." Then we have that statement, oh, that person's cool, calm, and collected. And we have the phrase, cooler minds will prevail. So in this analogy, the surface of the mind, surface up here, more heated, agitated, body tense, more agitated, heated areas of the mind, deeper levels of the mind, cooler areas, calmer areas. Still me. I'm still having the same thoughts. I'm not in some zone somewhere. I'm still having the same thoughts about work or family. But instead of up here where it's heated, it's here where it's cooler. And when I experience that, that's when the body gets this deep rest. So how do I go from here to here? Effortlessly. And because of the consideration of time, I won't take the next 6 hours to explain it. No, so I'm going to explain how it's done. How do we transcend? Transcend means vertical. How do we go? Transcend means to go beyond, if you look up a dictionary, to go beyond ordinary human limitations. How do we settle down to these deeper, more expanded levels of me? Effortlessly. So here's 2 examples that have nothing to do with the meditation, then I'll tie it back. You're sitting in a room, say you're somewhere in your house and you're working on something, some mindless numbers, paperwork, just got to do it. Been sitting on your desk for weeks. Then in the other room, miraculously, some of the most incredible music you've ever heard in your life comes on. Where's your attention go? Whoa, turn that, push the papers aside, turn that up. Or you have 2 books to read. Got to read. First book, How It Got Published. Horrible. Can't read a word. Second book, phenomenal. Hours go by. Now, what is that? Your attention drawn to that music and your attention absorbed in the book. This is the key to TM, right here, the understanding the explanation of it. In some forms of meditation, the assessment is the mind is a monkey. It will wander aimlessly. You have to stop it. In transcendental meditation, it's a different assessment. In TM, we understand that it's the nature of the mind. Given the opportunity, your mind will always be drawn to something more satisfying. Music, fragrance, more pleasurable, more enjoyable, more exciting, more delicious, more, just more. The attention is drawn to something more, given the opportunity, but it gets drawn out through the senses. So we look for that happiness or that pleasure or something outside. Fine. But inside, if there's an inside, because it's just a hypothesis, inside, some feel deep within me, it's not something, just my own nature, nice place. All transcendental meditation is learning how to set up the condition to give the attention of the mind an inward direction, not outward through the senses, an inward direction, like you teach a child how to dive. You say, honey, stand like this, take the correct angle, and then gravity takes over. So set up the condition to give the attention of the mind an inward direction, and without any effort whatsoever, the active thinking mind is drawn inward. Why? Because deeper levels are increasingly more satisfying. And now you know that's happening, because it's not a flashy experience, because your body feels so deeply relaxed. Sometimes people say to me, transcendental, that's a weird word. I get meditation, but they think it's not trans. It's not. To transcend. We look for transcendent experiences in relationships. You hold a newborn child in your arms, a transcendent moment between someone you love, sports, the zone. So someone said, how do you know when your 20 minutes are up? And I said, look at your watch. You're not going anywhere. You're just settling down. Now, how it differs from other approaches, Headspace, Calm, Muse, they're fine. They're gateway, they're fine. They don't facilitate the transcendent. When you're listening to music, and if you have, and I'll get into how we do that now, but it keeps the attention on the level of meaning or sound, and the research shows it's a good start, but it doesn't facilitate that profound expansion of transcendence. To learn to meditate, it's taught, which I really like about this, in personal instruction. You have your own certified meditation coach or trainer, and they work with you. It takes about an hour a day over 4 consecutive days, personal instruction, and then you got it. And what your teacher does, it gives you a mantra, which is a word or a sound, 1, 2, 3 syllables, simple sound, simple mantra. And then they teach you how to, he or she teaches you how to use it effortlessly, not as a catalyst, as a facilitator for the mind to be drawn inward effortlessly. And that requires personal instruction. After you've done those 4 days, it can all be done remote. I'll let you get in a question.
There are some great questions, and I think we're gonna have to have some answered after as well. You know, I can always have Bob answer some of these, but
well, you can email them to me, and I'll also just write back.
I will. What is the best time of day to meditate?
Well, with TM, and traditionally, it's always been done first thing in the morning, like in ancient times, dawn and dusk. But sometimes when we live in a city, we don't know when dawn and dusk is, because it's just we're in a big building somewhere. But first thing in the morning, I get up, and you get up first thing in the morning before I spend an hour on checking emails, and then my amygdala is on overdrive. Get up, go to the bathroom, wash up or something, sit up in bed. You don't have to sit in any uncomfortable position. You just sit up comfortably in a chair, and you meditate for 20 minutes as your teacher taught you. As I should say, once you have those 4 days, you have a lifetime of follow-up too. There's a lifetime of follow-up. And then that sets you for the day. It sort of allows your energy levels, rather than peaking and diving throughout the day, it keeps your energy levels on a higher level throughout the day and makes us more resilient to the buildup of stress. And then people do it in the afternoon, anytime from 2 or 3 o'clock on, whenever they can find 20 minutes. They do it hopefully sometime before dinner. You don't want to do it right before bed, because while this is relaxing, it's very energizing, and that can disrupt your sleep. But I remember when someone asked Ray Dalio, they said, well, how do you find the time to meditate? And he said, there's 1,440 minutes in a day. If we don't have 30 or 40 minutes to tune this up, we need to reprioritize. And that wasn't just like a smug response. You just make it a priority. You put it into your calendar as you'd put in meeting somebody, or, you know, for an old friend, or having a meeting.
I remember Jerry Seinfeld said that he used to put it in his contracts that he had to have a certain amount of 20 minutes to go do that.
Yeah, when he did Seinfeld, he had they shot scenes around Seinfeld when he did his meditation. You know, so he wasn't in the shot. And if you notice, most Seinfeld shots are with him.
And are you, when now we have sheltering in place and you learn TM one-on-one with an instructor in person, so how is the TM organization or the David Lynch Foundation teaching, or when does that start again?
Oh, so we're going to start teaching, and there's some states we've already started. When the shelter in place is over, then we're teaching. We're doing the, you know, social distancing of 6 feet. And in New York City, we hope to start it soon. So the thing is this really requires that human to human connection. So that subtle thing of how to turn the attention within and transcend, and how to take a sound, this mantra, which has no meaning associated with it. Because if it had a meaning, then you're just stuck up here thinking about kitchen or flower or whatever. It has no meaning. How to use it so something substantive takes place. So not just sort of wasting your time going, what am I doing with my life? So something really substantive happens. At the same time, for all the people who already meditate, do TM, I lead a group meditation 20 minutes twice a day during this time. Like we have 40 or 50,000 people a week join that. So once you learn, then you can have access to all the support you want.
I like this one. Would you agree that the goal, if there is one, is to maintain the meditative mind all the time, well, not an active meditation? If so, how can we work to achieve that while not meditating?
Oh, because the neuroplasticity of the brain. Because when you settle down and you have this coherent, I could go more, alpha 1 is a coherent, it's that state of restful alertness. That's one element of the alpha 1. But the other thing is, like when you see someone doing a concentration form of meditation and you see the gamma brain waves, it's often right here in the prefrontal cortex on the left. And so it's in that part of the brain there. But the alpha 1 and it functions in a coherent like wave. It sort of soothes or bathes the whole brain. And when you have that alpha 1 connection, 20 minutes twice a day, you form neural pathways. Like when you were a kid and you learned how to tie your shoe. You couldn't tie your shoe, and you couldn't tie your shoe, and you couldn't tie your shoe, and then bingo, you learn how to tie your shoe, and you never forget. It's there. Or ride a bike. Because you have in the same way, you start to meditate in the first few days and weeks, and then you've got these connections, these neural pathways, and they're even seeing the coherent alpha 1 lasting at the same, coexisting at the same time with delta brain waves during sleep, as well as the beta brain waves during waking state. So that part of the nervous system that is the meditative state, as you described, that smooth humming functioning of the nervous system, that stays in the midst of all our other actions. So those changes are not just a mood, they're changes in the way this is what I love about this. It's not just some moody thing. It's like the way my nervous system functions, my cardiovascular system functions, my respiratory system functions, my limbic system. It's real stuff.
I like this question. Somebody asked, are there affordable ways for students to learn TM? It's a course just like any other where you pay for the course, but would love to hear how people can get scholarships if there are scholarships available. And also maybe it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that David Lynch Foundation is doing.
Yes, so this is an nonprofit educational organization, and it is entirely sustained from the course fees that people pay, so that a TM teacher makes it as a profession. So course fee is, and so that's where the money goes to pay the teacher, pay a center. We have a tiered pricing for the course fees, and that's for the instruction and a lifetime of follow-up. There's no dues that you give, monthly dues or something. It's just once, and then that's it. And the tiered pricing is based on income, and a child, so it goes down to $380 for a lifetime of instruction. And for people who can't afford that, there are scholarships within the TM centers. But the David Lynch Foundation, which is its own 501c3, was established 16 years ago. And we've now provided scholarships for 1 million kids in under-resourced schools in the United States and actually all over the world to learn for free. And that took us about, we've been open for 15 years. It took us about 10 years to get to 1 million. I want to get to 5 million in the next 5 years. And the way we're doing that is research. We are looking at transcendental meditation as a medical, like you develop a new medicine. And for FDA approval, you have to go through the 3 stages of research: phase 1 clinical trial, phase 2, and phase 3. That's what they're fast tracking for this coronavirus vaccine, to show that it's safe, and they do it in several different sites. So we're doing that with TM for high blood pressure, anxiety, PTSD, substance use disorder, and other areas that depression, either in place or we're working on. And also right now, we're working with Duke University and others to do research on, and Weill Cornell to do research on frontline doctors, nurses, custodial staff, orderlies. Everyone is on the front line who's suffering from PTSD. So we have an initiative called the Heal the Healers Now. We're providing that for free to these heroes, and then we're doing research that would then open the doors for insurance companies to fund it, Medicare to fund it, and employee assistance programs to fund it. So that's what the David Lynch Foundation is doing. We don't want there to be any obstacle for anyone to have access to this.
I love that. What do you think are the most exciting frontiers in meditation? Research, methods, adaptation. What do you think is most exciting to you right now?
Brain research on the long-term effects of meditation over time. Just because, we have a model when we think of health in the last 400 years, it's been such a disease-oriented, and you guys know this, such a disease-oriented approach. And we know the 8 million different ways that of all the different diseases and disorders. And you just watch the morning news show, and then they've got every commercials for this drug or that drug, which is fine. It's addressing a problem. But I'm interested in, what do you do if a person is eating right over time, or has been meditating for 50 years, or been meditating for 5 years and 10 years? What are the changes in the way of the prefrontal cortex, the default mode network, this dual functioning, because there are different anatomical parts of the brain. The beta brain waves are here, and the alpha 1 is sort of a connection between the thalamus and other parts of the brain. So you can have this simultaneous. I'm really interested in knowing, how creative can we be? How resilient can we be? How often do we really need to get sick? Do we really have to start breaking down at this age? The whole thing about Alzheimer's now, twice as many women get Alzheimer's than men. Why? And, so that's one area in prevention, and the other area is in the area of the epigenetics and the effect of the meditation on calming the nervous system, so that the epigenome that's covering, let's say a person has a genetic predisposition for alcoholism in the family, or anxiety in the family, or insomnia, or violence. Well, there's a genetic predisposition, but the epigenome covers that. And what wears it down and sort of activates it is lifestyle effects, stress. So let's see what effect the TM has on that. We already know that it's phenomenally helpful for preventing relapses of substance use disorder, but how about from it even starting?
What are the studies on diabetes, the effects on diabetes?
Not enough. They just know that that inflammation, that stress and inflammation are driving risk factors and causes of diabetes. And we have been very active on American Indian reservations as a foundation, where as much as 80% of American Indian population comes with type 2 diabetes. It's just a horror because of their diet and sedentary lifestyle, whatever. And so we've been approached to do a study on TM for reducing the inflammation and signs of diabetes, but it's nothing strong. As you all know, it's very expensive to do solid research, very expensive. So that's what the foundation is working on, is to raise those funds in order to do that.
I like this one as one of the closing questions too, that TM's an evolving practice. And so how has it been evolving for you in over 50 years? How do you think it changes or gets better? Or, people often say, oh, you must be an expert because you've been doing it for 50 years. Does it change?
Well, it's a really, again, this is such an interesting thing, because the meditation, and it's sort of counterintuitive, the meditation itself is not an acquired skill. It's not like I get better quick over time. Oh, now I've been doing it for 2 months. Now I've been doing it for 4 months. Now I've been doing it for a year or 2 years. The ability to transcend, this is really important. The ability to transcend happens almost immediately, within the first few days. And the research shows that alpha 1 brainwave coherence that you find in transcendence happens within, it shows up, they say 3-4 months. It's locked on. And now you look at someone who's been meditating 2 years, very similar brainwave signature during the meditation. But the big difference is the neural pathways, the cumulative effects afterwards. That's when you start seeing that alpha 1 overlay of inactivity, the coherent brain functioning inactivity, and the reduced stress and stress response inactivity. So I would say, now to actually answer your question, I would say that my meditations, I love them. I mean, I look forward to them. They're very relaxing and enjoyable. But the big difference for me is just in my life. I asked Jerry Seinfeld, I'm name dropping here, but I said, he's been meditating almost 50 years. I said, what's your meditation like? He said, I don't even care. They're great. They're fine. But for me, I used to be dead tired at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now I sail right through it. I travel all over the place. I'm crystal clear. I have the energy I need, and he prioritizes it. He makes the time. So I would answer the question, I really enjoy the practice, but the sumptuousness, the real comes in the daily life. And that has just been my sense of self, but my energy levels, my happiness, my resilience. But it's all natural. It's all normal. It's nothing. I also don't like this sort of affectation around the word meditation and, oh, he's this and that, and he's must be. I think sign of a person who's been meditating short time or long time, how really of a human being they are, how creative, how kind, how compassionate, how resilient, how intelligent, how innovative. A human being. You don't need to have an affectation about it. Just be yourself.
So I know a lot of people practice their meditation. I think they'll take a lot of what you said into their practice. And if you haven't tried transcendental meditation, it's something you want to try as a form of meditation, how should the people who are watching go about doing that?
I am giving, and I gave it to Heather to put up my email address. And it is my email. That doesn't go to somebody else. It's my email address.
But you do that, and he always responds. He does.
I do. I just respond. I figure if you sat and listened to me talk for this long, and you have a question, I'll answer it because I didn't have the time. It's bob@davidlynchfoundation.org. And if you have questions, you can also go to tm.org, which will tell you more about just basics of TM. And the David Lynch Foundation, the work that we're doing, it is very inspiring. The work that we're doing with these under-resourced populations. That's davidlynchfoundation.org.
So if you send Bob an email, put human in the subject, and he'll know to respond to it from this call.
Do you have a slate to put up? Don't you have a slate?
We do have a slate, but yeah.
Okay. It's bob@davidlynchfoundation.org. I'll answer your question.
Bob, I want to thank you so much for doing this for our founders and our human community. There are so many more questions to be answered, so hopefully we can do a follow-up. I do recommend Bob's book, Strength in Stillness. It does talk a lot about the practice and goes into depth in some of these questions that you had. And then if you have any other follow-up questions that you do want to ask, just email them to me and I'll make sure to have Bob answer them too. So thank you very much.
Wait, I get to say something, inappropriate as it may be. Heather Hartnett is one of the most extraordinary human beings I know. And I
love to say that. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And I just had to say that because it was mainly for her. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.